Okay, welcome everybody to the Voice of Ukraine webinar. I see that we have few attendees. We are waiting for some other to join. And so let's wait 1 minute before starting the formal presentation. Starting for me, you might hear a fire alarm ringing. Sorry for the noise. It's a test we are doing here in Brussels every third Thursday of the month, but it will last just a few seconds. Okay, I would start. As I said, welcome. We are going to our Voice of Ukraine webinar. We are going to present some of the analysis we have run using the results of the Voice of Ukrainian project. Today, we will focus mainly on the life trajectories and future outlooks of the displaced Ukrainian in Europe 4 years after the outbreak of the war. Before starting, some housekeeping points. So the session will be recorded, and then we will share the link to the recording to all the participants. I hope it's not a problem. Participants will not appear on the screen, and if you have question, you can use the Q&A function that is in the toolbar on the bottom of the screen. We will receive the question and we will answer to all of them at the end of the presentation. If some of you have problems in understanding English, we have set up an automatic translation tool. To activate it, please follow the instruction as shown on the screen. So click on CC in the toolbar, click the up arrow next to CC to view option, select the speaking language that should be English and your preferred language in captation language. I hope it's clear and will help. There will be 4 speakers for in this webinar. Myself, Marco Pelucchi, I am account director at Verian in Brussels. Francesca Chessa, that is senior research executive in Verian in Brussels as well. She's seated in front of me. Oriane Dar, that she is a research executive in Paris. And there will be Job Adema. He is a former PhD at Info Institute, and now is working as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Adema. Info Institute is the main sponsor of our survey, and they are doing a lot of analysis and publication based on the results we are providing every week. We will cover 4 topics. First of all, I will have a short background of I'm presenting the main feature of Voice of Ukrainian for those who are not familiar with the project. Oriane will present some life and integration patterns that we have identified. Francesca will talk about the future outlooks of Ukrainians in Europe, and Job will present some findings about return plan and integration of young Ukrainians. Let's start with a bit of context. 4 years ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine, about 7 million of Ukrainian citizens came to Europe mainly in Poland at that day. To face the situation, the European institution promulgated the Temporary Protection Directive. After 4 years of wars, there are about a bit more than 4 millions of Ukrainians that are still benefiting from this program, and these numbers are still a bit rising. Looking at the situation in Germany and Poland, that are the two major hosting countries, we can see while Poland is stable but with a little tendency to decrease because people are moving from Poland to other countries, we can see that in Germany this tendency is still a little increasing, the number of people that are beneficiaries of temporary protection. Talking about our program, Voice of Ukrainian is an online longitudinal survey of people displaced from Ukraine to Europe. In June 22, we launched this online panel to monitor what happened to displaced Ukrainians in EU, and to have an in-depth insight into their changing behavior on a relatively long period of time. We managed to establish the sample through recruitment via social media and ads, as snowballing through relevant association of Ukrainian diaspora and charities. Data collection is made online with a self-completed questionnaire, and since 2022, we have conducted 11 waves, and today we are presenting the 11 results. And in this period, the project raised over 20,000 euros of incentives that have been donated to the Ukrainian charities, and these charities have been selected by the panelists. They prefer to give to the charities the incentives we are paying them for taking part in our project. Our panelists are very committed to our project. After 4 years, we are still succeeding in getting at least 1,000 respondents per wave. About 600 respondents of 600 respondents of wave 11 have answered of at least 2 or more previous waves, and more than 200 respondents of wave 11 took part in all waves. This loyalty is quite exceptional for this type of panels, and it's one of its main values, very appreciated by researchers and academics. And our intention is to continue with at least 2 additional waves in 2026 with our main partner, that is IFO Institute, as I mentioned. Looking at the sample of wave 11, we have 1,031 respondents. 85% are women. 60% of them are aged between 36 to 54 years old. And 27% of respondents are located in Germany. 17% are in Poland, and 11 are, at least at the moment of the survey, back in countries. This distribution in terms of gender, age, and location is very in line with the distribution of our panelists. And the fact that there are 11% of Ukrainians in Poland is quite volatile. The presence in the countries, they are going back and coming back to Europe. So there is a bit more freedom of movement compared to the original of the war. In the wave 11, we also conducted for the first time a mirror survey, interviewing Ukrainians living in Ukraine, people that never left Ukraine, to see what are the similarities or the differences in behaviors with those who have left the country. For this component, we recruited respondents via an access online panel based in Ukraine with quotas on gender, and we collected also here 1,000 interviews. And Francesca will present some of the findings of this survey, comparing the results of displaced Ukrainians with those Ukrainians living in Ukraine. Now I leave the floor to Oriane.
Hey, hello. Thank you, Marco. So I'm going to talk about life patterns in the and the integration of Ukrainians in Europe. We asked several questions across different waves in order to track how respondents' situation have evolved over time. In the upcoming slides, I will present the data from Wave 11 conducted in December 2025, compared with data from Wave 3 conducted in January 2023. So these two datasets are therefore almost 3 years apart. And first, I'm going to talk about feeling welcome and feeling integrated in the host cities. The first thing we can observe from this slide is that the share of respondents who feel welcome has increased, but only very slightly. If we look at the question, do you feel welcome in the city, town you currently live in, on the left of the slide, the proportion of people answering always or often goes up by only 2 points. So overall, the feeling of being welcomed hasn't really changed much in 3 years. But it's quite different when we look at the question, how well integrated do you feel in the city, town you currently live in, on the right of the slide. Here, the trend is stronger. The share of respondents who say they feel integrated or well integrated actually doubles, rising from 17 to 34%. So while the feeling of being welcomed by the whole city has barely moved, the feeling of being integrated into everyday life has clearly improved. Respondents seems to be finding their place better, even if they don't necessarily feel more received. And this could be explained by this new slide. The share of respondents who are currently working has increased significantly from 30 to 52%, meaning more than half have now paid employment in the country of residence. Meanwhile, the share of respondents who are in any type of school has halved, dropping from 31 to 14%. We could think that after receiving training and learning the local language, many have transitioned into employment. And as a result, the proportion of respondents who are unemployed and actively looking for a job has decreased. We can see a strong shift from training to employment, suggesting integration into the labor market. And consequently, the share of respondents receiving an income has also increased from 42 to 59%. However, respondents' expenses are less and less supported by their own saving or by financial aid from authorities. This slight support has dropped from nearly half of respondents to about 1/3. In the same dynamic, the share of respondents living in private rented accommodation has increased significantly from 40 to 63%. At the same time, housing support from local authorities and support from local families have both decreased by 7 points from 22% to 15% and by 10 points from 14 to 4% respectively. So respondents are increasingly moving towards independent housing solutions, maybe showing a broader trend of autonomy and long-term settlement. Overall, what we see is that respondents are gradually finding more stability in their daily lives. More of them are working, earning an income, and living in private renting housing, which shows a move towards independence. They are more integrated and they feel more integrated. But at the same time, it's important to underline that this doesn't mean they feel truly welcome. Even though their sense of integration has improved, the feeling of being genuinely welcome hasn't really followed the same path. And it raises and question, how do respondents envision their future in their host country? And I will let Francesca talk about the future outlooks.
Thank you, Oriane. Yes, so now a few results about future outlooks and plans of our panelists. So what we have been doing since 2023 was to collect opinions and expectations of our panelists about the outcome of the war and also about their plans regarding coming back to Ukraine. So now we can observe trends in how these opinions and plans have changed. But as Marco mentioned, in this latest wave of survey, we have also done something differently. So we have also interviewed a sample of Ukrainians based in Ukraine, so that we can also compare the expectations and plans of these two groups. And now, before showing you the key results of the survey, a few words on the two samples that we have surveyed in December for wave 11. So first of all, about age. So as Marco mentioned, again, our Voice of Ukraine panel consists of largely of people in working age. So we have the majority is aged between 35 and 54, while as you can see in these graphs, the panel of Ukrainians in Ukraine that we surveyed on wave 11 has a higher share of people aged 55 and plus, which is consistent with the Ukrainian population statistics. So on the right side of the slide, you can see a comparison with the latest available population statistics that date from 2022. However, we can assume that the share of people that are aged 55 plus is stable or even has increased. And then also gender composition of our two samples. On the left, Voice of Ukraine panel, it consists mostly of women. In this wave, as was already mentioned, we had 85% of women respondents, which makes sense because our panel consists of displaced women that moved out of Ukraine during the first months after the outbreak of the war. On the right, you have the composition on our sample of Ukrainian based in Ukraine, and of course, it's more balanced, and we actually have a small overrepresentation of men compared to women. And finally, something interesting also about education background. One thing we know about our panelists, and which is also reflected in the latest results of Wave 11, is that they are highly educated. So what we found is that this group of people who've moved out of Ukraine due to the full-scale war is highly educated and more educated than the average of the country. So here you can see the differences between our Voice of Ukraine panel of people outside Ukraine and the panel of Ukrainians in Ukraine. So we have a overrepresentation in Voice of Ukraine panel of people who have a master's, at least a master's degree or higher degree, like a PhD. While when we look at the panel of Ukrainians in Ukraine, we also see a very highly educated population, but still, again, the share of people who have a master's degree is closer to the latest population statistics, so around 30%, while we have a higher share of people with a first university degree or high education degree, and also quite much higher share of people with a professional or vocational type of education. So this was some background on our respondents. Now looking at future outlooks. So first of all, here you have what our Voice of Ukraine panelists expect as outcome of the war, how their opinion has changed over time. So in this slide, we are comparing the results of November 2023, so wave 6, with wave 11, so the last one, which was these two waves which were conducted in the similar period of the year. And in both occasions, we ask our respondents what they will expect the outcome of the war to be within 1 year time. And so what we see is that we have a quite high share, so roughly 1 in 3 respondents that expect the war to continue beyond 1 year time. But also another striking result is that what we see is that we see a constant decrease in the share of people that expect Russia to withdraw from all the territories they occupied. And on the other hand, we see an increase in those that expect that at some point there will be Ukraine will give up on some territories. If we look at, so here we have a comparison with wave 6. If we look at even back in time at very early waves we conducted in summer 2023, we had a very, very high share of people that will expect Ukraine to be able to retrieve all the territories that at the time the share was above 70%. Now we are on around 10%. But at the same time, it's also interesting that the share of people who expect Russia to prevail has not changed much and is still very, very low. So we had close to zero in early waves. Now we are at 2-3% depending on the wave. So there is still confidence on the possibility on the capacity to Ukraine to still prevail in the war. And then what happens when we compare to our respondents in Ukraine? So we see that our panelists in Europe are more pessimistic about the outcome of the war. So we see that among those who are in Europe, there is less trust in the possibility of the war to finish soon. So we have a higher share of people that expect the war to continue for longer than 1 year. And also panelists in Ukraine are more, or at least their responses are more optimistic about the possibility of the capacity of Ukraine to retrieve all the territories in the end. But yeah, when we look at the share of people that, again, that expect Russia to prevail, the share is low in both panels. Then this said, so what do our respondents plan for their future? Here again, you have we have a slide on trends in our Voice of Ukraine panel. We are comparing the intentions to return between wave 3, so January 2023, and wave 11. So 3 years have passed. We should keep in mind that during these 3 years, some of our panelists have actually come back to Ukraine. So here we are interviewing those who have stayed, and we are at these 2 moments in time, we are asking people who are in Europe what they think about coming back to their country. And what we see as the main change is the decrease, the sharp decrease in the share of people that still plan to go back to Ukraine. So those who are now outside Ukraine in other European countries after 4 years, they are less and less planning, still thinking about coming back. And conversely, we have an increase in the share of those that have finally decided or plan to settle outside the country, and also an increase in the share of those that are undecided. We can imagine that there has been a shift from first thinking, planning to come back at some point, to in the end being not sure anymore about this, and some people are still figuring out. And then, so here we compare, we look at, we look together at the intentions to return on the left of our Voice of Ukraine panelists, and intentions to leave of our respondents in Ukraine on the right. And so what the message is, so we see less and less people, on the one hand, less and less people that are outside that still plan to come back. We had 60% in the early waves. Now we have 30. On the other hand, we also have a small share of people that are now in Ukraine that after 4 years are still planning to leave. We have about 12% that are undecided. Of course, we have a share that will tell us they can't leave. But also those who plan to leave soon are very few. We have a 3% that tell us that, but also we have a small share of people that tell us that they will consider leaving even if the situation deteriorates. So what we get from these figures is that the situation is now quite stable. But now one final look at these intentions by age group. So what we see on the left is the intentions to return of our Voice of Ukraine panelists by age. And what we see is that younger respondents, so young Ukrainian outside Ukraine, are much less likely to plan to return. They are much more likely to actually consider staying abroad. While people that are, for example, we have the 65 plus, they are definitely, even after 4 years, they are still, the majority of them is still planning to return at some point in Ukraine. On the right, conversely, like the same message is that young people are more likely to consider leaving the country. And while as age increase, people are less likely to consider leaving even if the situation deteriorates. So we see young generation, in both cases, what we see is that the young generation is increasingly considering rebuilding their life abroad. But now, on this note, I leave the floor to Joop, who will tell us more about, indeed, return intentions about among young people.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francesca. Very interesting also to see the results from the panel in Ukraine. So I'm going to tell a little bit more about the panel of Ukrainians outside of Ukraine, and I'm particularly interested in return plans and the integration of young refugees as well as the children of refugees. So basically, we've worked extensively with the Verian panel and we've written several papers. So here we basically kind of give a bit of overview of what we've been doing recently. So the motivation behind this is that the return decisions of Ukrainians and the integration are, of course, crucial, right? So young Ukrainians are at a crucial age that they make very important life decisions. So people decide whether they go into the labor market, whether they go study. For children, they decide, what school do I go to? Do I go to a school in the host country, or do I go to a school that also offers me kind of Ukrainian language, or maybe even do the Ukrainians university entrance exam when they're 16, 17. And of course, this determines the demographic future of Ukraine, right? Who returns is very important. And here there's a little bit of a tension, of course, between the policy goals of host countries and policy goals of Ukraine, right? Because if people integrate well, they might be less likely to return to Ukraine. So first I will talk a bit about return intentions, and then I will talk about integration of children. Okay, so here basically you see something that Francesca already alluded to a little bit. Return intentions among young people have massively shifted. So basically here you see the level of return intentions over time on the individual level. And you see basically the share in dark blue that have actually returned to Ukraine. This is the sample of everyone who is I think I skipped the slide. This is the one that I wanted to show. So this is everyone below 35. So among young Ukrainians in the beginning, something like 60% of Ukrainians said they wanted to return sooner when safe. And this has decreased dramatically. So by the last wave 11, this is only 20%. At the same time, you see that the share of young Ukrainians that say that they want to settle outside of Ukraine also has increased from only 15% to more than 40%. And in this age range, something like 8% of returns. And this looks very different if you look at older Ukrainians. So basically, if you look at those Ukrainians that are 35 and above, also 60% in the beginning wanted to return to Ukraine. This has decreased, but not as strongly as that among young Ukrainians. And what we also do in several survey waves is that we ask parents to assess whether their children also want to return or not. So using this, we can basically compare the return intentions of parents and their own children. And basically here you see the share of parents and children want to return by the age of the children. You see for young children, return intentions of parents and children, they mostly align. So approximately 40% want to return to Ukraine. But if you look at older children, if anything, the parents are more likely to want to return, but the children are less likely to want to return. So you really see this gap opening up where parents might still want to return, but children, they update their plans and they don't want to return anymore. Okay. So here we've talked about Ukrainians that we have in the Verian panel, which is people that have left already in 2021, right? So still there is people leaving Ukraine. And here we specifically focus on young individuals between 18 and 34. So you see here that basically over 23 till 25, every month there were 10,000 young men and young women that were leaving. And as most of you might know, Ukraine lifted the ban on men leaving Ukraine between 18 and 22 in August 2025. And here we basically see what this did to Ukrainians leaving. So this is data from Eurostat. So this is registered data on how many Ukrainians by sex have registered in this age category. So we see that when this ban was lifted, many young men, probably men between 18 and 22, left Ukraine. So here we can basically estimate that since this reform in August 2025, some more than 65,000 young men have left Ukraine. And you also see that maybe there's a bit of an increase also in the share of young women that have left. Maybe they left with their partners that were now allowed to leave. Okay, and what we also do in one of the survey waves is kind of not to ask, okay, what are current return intentions, but really try to understand what are the return intentions in specific post-war scenarios. So basically we ran an experiment where we gave random hypothetical scenarios and people had to indicate, do I want to return or do I not want to return? So here we basically show our results by age category, and we here see that even after the fighting would end, the share of young people that want to return is lower than among old people. So here among young people, something like 23% said they would want to return on average over all these scenarios, and this is more than 40% among those aged 55 and plus older. And for all respondents, regardless of age, the most important factors for conditions to return when the fighting ends is territorial control and security guarantees, which I don't think is surprising because these strongly determine whether Ukraine will be safe after the fighting ends. However, if we look at young individuals between 18 and 34, we see that for young individuals, job opportunities and income levels, as well as corruption, is more important than for older individuals. So I think this is specific. If the fighting would end, hopefully at some point, then economic conditions are important to attract also younger individuals back to Ukraine. Okay, so now I want to say a bit more on the integration of children, mostly related to schooling. So we asked parents also for all of their children to indicate whether they go to a host country school or whether they still follow an in-person or online curriculum in the Ukrainian school. And here we see that most children between 6 and 15, they are going to school and they are enrolled in a host country school. Here we see, of course, that after age 15, less children are in school. Maybe some of them already started working. It's not very different between boys and girls. Okay, so we also ask parents whether their children are part of clubs. So basically these are clubs outside of school. So this is kind of a bit of a measure of, do people integrate in civil society outside of schools? And here we basically see that quite some, approximately 15% of Ukrainian children, they are part of such a club. And we see that there's here some interesting age and gender difference. And we see especially among older boys, they are more likely to be part of a non-school club, and older girls are less likely to be part of a school club. And then among school children that are in high school, we are interested in what kind of school types they are doing. So in most European countries, there is a system of tracking, which means that there's different levels of high schools, and children are typically selected into those between age 9 and 15. So this was a bit motivated by a policy report in the Netherlands, which said that many children in the Netherlands, Ukrainian children, they are still in the lowest track. So they lack the language skills to directly, operate at their level. and that's why most of them go into the lowest track. And this might not be ideal because they are in a school that is below their capabilities. So we were interested whether this is also the case in other countries. So here we basically see the share of children in our sample in Germany by school type. And here gymnasium is basically the school type that gives you access to university education. So we see here that 30% of children in our sample go to the gymnasium. This is only a little bit lower than among native German children. So we see that at least in Germany, many students also go to the academic track, which suggests that the problem of school kids being in a track below their level is actually not too large in Germany. If we look at the same for Poland, we see in Poland there's 3 tracks and they start a little bit later at age 15. Academic, technical, and vocational track. We see that quite some are also in the academic track, but a bit more are in the technical track. So here it does not seem that almost no one makes it to the academic track, which, as I said, is the case in the Netherlands, but it here seems that the German and Polish school system better managed to integrate Ukrainian children. For Poland, of course, language proximity might be an important reason. Okay, and then we also keep track of whether Ukrainian children still go to in-person or online Ukrainian schools. And here we see that this is still pretty prevalent. So this is from a wave in the end of 24. And basically, it depends a bit per age. So, of course, older children, they are more rooted in the Ukrainian school system. So they are a bit more likely. So kids among age 15, they are a bit more likely to be in an online or in-person Ukrainian school. But we see that's pretty prevalent. So here really rates are approximately 50 to 60% for 15-year-olds. So this basically really shows you that many children go to school in the host country and then later they even go to an online school. So they are pretty busy with school activities in many cases. Okay, and then I would like to quickly say something about our Ukrainian children of age 16, 17 still participating in the Ukrainian university entrance exam. So the National Multi-Subject Test is a test that basically gives you access to universities, and often universities, they set basically requirements of certain grades you have to get to be able to enroll in their degree programs. So before the war, so that's the bar on the left, we basically see that something between 60 and 70% of all school children took this test in a given cohort. It's a bit larger for girls than for boys. And we see that in Ukraine, in the first year, it decreased a bit, but then it rebounded a bit. That's still approximately the same rate of children is taking the test. And on the right, because since the war started, Ukraine also set up testing centers for this exam abroad. So you can take it, for example, in Munich or other large cities in Europe. We see that much less children actually take this test. So we approximate that something like 25 or 20% of Ukrainian school children still take this university entrance exam for Ukraine, although this is decreasing over time. Okay, so with that, what I would like to conclude. So when looking at return intentions and actual return, we see that young people are less likely to return, and their return intentions have strongly decreased, which did not happen among all Ukrainians. So this really shows that the demographic challenges for Ukraine will probably be harsh. And as our experimental evidence shows that even if the war or the fighting would end, it would be hard to be able to attract young individuals. However, on the flip side, we see that the young do integrate fast in host countries. They do manage to keep up in host country school systems, although they might be in slightly lower tracks in high school than natives. Okay, with that, I would like to conclude and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Job, for your presentation, and thank you, Francesca and Dorian. Of course, there are several challenges. We see that the people that left Ukraine are more educated than those who remained in Ukraine. And now there is also this aspect that the children, the young adults are less willing to go back and want to stay in Western Europe, where they can attend the the university and so on. So there will be a problem of a demographic problem, as you mentioned, but also some so also the level of people, so is I would say of the education is slightly decreasing in Ukraine compared it was in the past. But now we have few questions that we have received. Thank you for those who have posted it. I will start with this question about how panel participation in survey evolves over time and what the future you see for Voice of Ukraine. So the panel participation is slightly decreasing, even if in each wave we succeed in getting at least 1,000 interviews, but it's more harder to get this minimum level that we set as a target. The reason behind is that we created the panel 4 years ago, and it's very hard to keep the panel member to be loyal to this panel. But as I said in my slide previously, we are quite happy on these results. And we are thinking to relaunch some recruitment phase to find other people that could join the panel in the future. And this is why we are working with the IFO Institute, that is our partner, to find an agreement to continue the survey in the next, at least for 2026, and probably also later. So another question, I hope I have answered. Another question I got is how difficult was to find survey participants, and that was we launched in late spring 2022 this advertising campaign targeting Ukrainians that left the country at that time. It was a very basic campaign, just a little announcement saying if you have if you've been obliged to leave Ukraine and you want to share your experience, please click the link. And then we asked several questions, and at the end we asked, would you be ready to participate again in similar survey in the future? We get more than 10,000 respondents at that moment, and about 6,000 accepted to be recontacted, and that was these are our base for the panel. Each way we mail out 6,000 invitation, and we get 1,000 respondents to this. People are usually very happy to answer to the question, even sometimes some questions that are quite sensible regarding their life conditions, their relationship with the family that stayed in the country, relationship mother with children, and so on. But people are quite open, and we see during the surveys that there are not many that drop off the interview during. So people that do not finish the interview and stop before the question. Very few decided to withdraw after the survey, so asking us to do not contact them anymore. But of course, as I said, they are not always the same answering, and they are not always, and they are free not to answer even if they receive an invitation.
Also, something that I think is worth noting is, especially since some of our panelists are here listening to us, during Wave 11, we asked the panelists to share photos with us and answer open-ended question. So we still have a very rich database that we haven't analyzed yet, and we hope we will be able to present it to you soon.
Do you answer to the next question?
Yeah, do you have the microphone open?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yes, because we received another question about interpretation of people expectations about outcome of the war. So we see only 3% of Ukrainians believe Russia can win. However, 25% of people still Ukraine is winning, selected by 25% of Ukrainians in Ukraine and only 10% of Ukrainians outside Ukraine. How do we explain this? I think okay, so there are of course, so we are analyzing the responses we received. There might be different ways to interpret, like how people interpret the question, whether there is a bias somehow, the type of response they provided. Some responses might be like considered more acceptable than other, I don't know, but I believe so. My understanding is that as time passes, we have less people who believe the war will end in a short time, of course, but that will end with a full retrieval of territories. But it doesn't mean that we don't see in this answer we don't get the impression that people believe that Ukraine is not succeeding in the war. I think as time passes, more and more people expect there will be some sort of, first of all, there are more people that expect there will be some sort of ceasefire at some point, but also we have less people that possibly expect a clear one of the two sides succeeding completely. So they will see that will be some sort of probably some exchange of territories and things like this. But I think that's they see probably they see the results as less clear cut as they would expect in the early stages. But they don't seem to lose trust overall on neither those that are outside Ukraine and those that are in Ukraine. That's what the impression I have. I don't know if colleagues.
And I think also that the people who left the Ukraine to come to Europe, they were afraid. They were, and they are still a bit more. They are living now in countries where the narrative around the world is different, probably from what they hear in Ukraine. These are my own thoughts. I do not have any evidence on this. And so while probably people who stay in Ukraine stay also because they are more confident than people who left about the result of the war, and probably how the war is, the narrative around the world is different in Ukraine and what is heard outside. I hope this can give some, I hope we have answered, and these are our interpretation, of course. I don't know if anybody else has questions.
Okay, so we got a question.
So you hear Francesca's voice and you see my face because we are working with a single microphone.
Yeah, so we got a question about return intentions of people in the two main countries, Poland and Germany, like main host countries. Yeah, so I think what we observed over time, so in the early phases, we could see that we had a much higher number of people, a much higher share of people that were in Poland that planned to leave or come back to Ukraine, while people who were host in Germany, they were more likely to plan to stay already time ago. But now what we see now after 4 years, those who have stayed in the country, or those who are now in those countries, so who are outside Ukraine after 4 years, they seem to be, so the two populations seem to converge at some point. So in the beginning, we had the impression, like from the data, it seems that a lot of people were in Poland and consider it as a country of transit. So, but maybe at this point, those who had the intention to return are also return home, most likely. So those who are still in Poland now, they are increasingly plan to stay. And so the same trend we see in Germany. So in Germany, that was apparent from the beginning. But the patterns of those that are still in the two countries 4 years after, they seem to convert. So in both cases we have less and less people who plan to leave, and also more people that feel integrated in the two countries. In the early stages, we had fewer people that, a smaller share of people felt integrated in Germany than they felt in Poland. But then now also regarding this question, we see a convergence. So in the two countries, we have similar share of people that are, in the end, they tell us that they are feeling increasingly integrated. So yeah, we get a sense of that the situation is stabilizing after all this time. I hope this answers the question.
Okay. I do not see other questions coming. So I would like to thank you for attending this webinar. As I mentioned, we are planning to have 1 or 2 waves of Voice of Ukraine in 2026. And based on the results, we will probably organize a new webinar to keep the people who are interested in the subject informed. So I would say stay tuned and we will hear from us. And I would like to thank you, Francesca, Oriana, and Joop for their contribution to this webinar. Thank you. And there is another question?
No.
No, it's a thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank you.